Roddy, it's an interesting thought that people can put two people in one grave at different times.
Yeah, that's fairly common in New Zealand. We have what we call a double interment. So it makes sense. You have one piece of ground and you dig the grave a little bit deeper, one on top of the other. That's really common. In fact, some of the cemeteries in New Zealand you can go over what we call triple depth. So you could have essentially three vertical bunks, if you will.
Because you don't have to go 18 feet down.
You do have to go, well, not quite 18 feet, but it's jolly close to it. It's a long way down.
Really?
A lot of the cemeteries in Canterbury, the water table was too close to the surface, so that's not possible, or the soil is not suitable for it. There's a variety of reasons, but one trend that is emerging, a big problem for cemeteries right throughout the world, is that as people shift towards cremation, you've got all these cemeteries that have an infrastructure attached to them. And as you know, in Canterbury, we've got a council that is running on fairly lean times in terms of their income. And one of the things that they're looking to
That's
do...
a very nice way of putting it, Roddy McKinnon.
Yeah, they're tight, yeah, shall we say, yes. And the issue that they've got is that they have to keep increasing the cost of the plot, and their interment fees are basic. It seems almost on a 6-monthly basis. It's not quite that bad, but it's close to it. To keep pace to the fact that they've got dropping incomes because they don't have multiple interments. So as we go towards cremation as a nation, and we are, we're probably about 70% now, and I think we'll be 80% by the end of the decade. Only what was plenty of consistent income, what was a grave for life, as it were, as a concept, is really fundamentally flawed. So New South Wales in Australia, across the ditch, has introduced legislation that you now buy a lease on a grave, and it's for a set period of time.
A lease? A
lease, and at the end of that time, if you don't renew your lease, you will be disinterred, and the remains cremated and given to you in ashes. Now, for a lot of people, that would have some religious and ethical and just downright yuck issues associated with it. It's not uncommon around the world. In Sri Lanka, you buy a family plot, and every time there's a family death, the last interment, or the one previous, is disinterred, placed into one side, the bones are clean, placed into a little box. The new person goes into the grave, and all the bones are placed back on top of them. And so one of our staff members who lived there for about 12 years, he said he's seen up to 25 boxes stacked up on the one side of this family plot. And it's the same concept. Ground is precious, don't have a lot of income. If you sell a grave for life, or in New Zealand's case, it's in perpetuity, who is going to pay for it in 100 years' time to maintain it? Who's going to mow the lawns? When you've only been paid years ago a small amount. And because, like most councils, they don't think that far ahead, they've got no...
Most of them don't think past the next
election.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think it's just something we're going to see in New Zealand, that it may not happen in the next sort of 5 or 6 years, I think, but it is something that's been looked at by some councils, that burial now has a time limit on it. There's a shelf life, as it were. And so that's something, as we as a nation, we have to look at. And it's interesting. We seem to have a lot of dirt, but we've got no one willing to pay for it, as you can imagine.
It's interesting you're saying 70 and growing towards 80% cremations. Is that a fashion thing, or is it because of graves?
I think there's two drivers. I think as we become more secular as a society, there's less pressure to be buried, because traditionally, Christian, we're predominantly a Christian nation, or we were, now we're not. So we've got all of the people who have immigrated from other parts of the world who bring their own funerary practices, traditions with them, and a lot of those are cremation. We've been historically Anglo-Saxon Protestant, as it were, and that's now shifting. So there's no pressure to be buried. The fact of the matter is the rising cost of the grave is a significant margin above a cremation funeral. So people are going, well, hang on, I can do a funeral.
Economic.
Yeah, it's economic. You could do a cremation funeral for around about $8,000, but to do exactly the same thing but be buried might cost you $9,500. And so $1,500, it buys a really good wake at the pub.
Well, it's also a lot of cases, it's just people get stretched, they can't afford
it. Absolutely. And I think everything comes into consideration. And if you don't have an imperative to be buried, essentially, if you look at it on a logical point of view, cremation just hastens the process by about 40 years, because at the end of the day, what's in a grave is there's very little left, even bones. Most people think the graveyards are full of bones. They're not. They dissolve within about 30, 40 years. the natural minerals in the soil and the water moving through the soil dissolve them, and there's nothing there. You can dig up some of these graves that are 100-year-old, and all you'll keep going, you'll just work your way through the soil, and you'll never find anything. You might find a few screws from the casket, maybe the odd metal handle, but that's all there'll be. And so once people think that process through, they suddenly realise that cremation is no real difference. It's just a shorter time frame.
Yeah, and yet, funnily enough, you know, we watch television and see that Richard III's bones were found under a car park.
Exactly. Look, there's always going to be.
Sorry.
Thanks for contradicting me, Rob. Good one.
No, just sort of, because that's the concept. That's
it
the
is the concept.
perspective.
It is, but you know, I think any farmer will point out to you that if you leave a stock in the gully and don't retrieve a dead animal, you come back in a year's time, there's nothing there. The same thing applies. If the soil conditions are correct, as in no microbial action, it's in clay.
Right.
And it's dry, yes, the bones will survive. But in New Zealand, that's not the case. We're a young geological nation, and so there's a lot of activity going on. However, there are down where I'm from in Timaru, some of those country cemeteries down there, that's pure clay. There's 6 inches of topsoil, and then it's pure clay. And those there, I guarantee you, there would be remains if you would just go looking.
You know, I wasn't trying to contradict you. I just wanted to sort of say
people's
concept is.
Let me know how you get on.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, I want to talk to you briefly about money, because you said, you know, sort of around about 8,000. There is a rule of thumb in there somewhere?
Yeah, rule of thumb is you give me as much money as I possibly can get out of you. No. Look,
we won't quote John.
Most funerals these days, if they're what we consider a full service funeral, as in they have newspaper notices, they have flowers, they have a casket that's not a cardboard box, they have a service of some description, and they have some form of catering, either before or after or during. Those sort of funerals are going to be in the $8,000 to $9,000 range.
Yep.
If they are burial, they'll go higher than that, but the two determining factors on whether a funeral goes beyond that will be if they have gone from just a standard cup of tea to something special for food, or if they have picked a very expensive casket. For the most part, you could throw a blanket over most funeral costs. There are much cheaper options available, but they are automatically cremation. Because to give you an example now, if you said to me, Roddy, I want to buy a plot in the Christchurch City Cemetery tomorrow, I'll send you a bill for $2,600, and I won't have clipped the ticket. That's exactly what the council will have charged me to provide that service, and you can purchase it yourself. So when you think about that as a proportion of funeral costs, that $2,500 is going straight to a council, doesn't leave a whole bunch for all the other things, the casket, the flowers, the newspaper notices. You can spend $1,000 on newspaper notices by putting one in the press, one in the Auckland Herald, and then one on the day.
Very briefly, if you don't do a service, there's no real closure.
I think at the end of the day, if you look at someone's life, whether it be 60, 70, 80, 90 years, and they just disappear with no acknowledgement, the people left behind will not be in as good a shape as if they'd taken the time to actually remember the person. And I'm not saying you need to spend money on it, but actually acknowledging the life in some way, shape or form is hugely important to us as a society. We don't treat people like we're just getting rid of them. We do want to honour their memory, we do want to say, and like I say, you don't need a funeral director to do that, but you should do something.